The basics of shape language that everybody always covers involve circles, triangles, and rectangles. A majority of tutorials cover these three basic shapes and will drill it into your skull. That circles represent bounciness and softness, and a sort of joyfulness like a bouncy ball or a little round baby face. Triangles have sharp edges representing instability, harshness, the edge of a blade, or a thorn on a rose. Squares and rectangles are structural. They bind, they represent stability, stoicism, an unmovable object in the face of a storm. But I want to dig into these things further. So let's talk about rectilinear shapes and curvilinear shapes. Curvilinear shapes are circles. They are also any oblong, amorphous shape that you can make out of a circle without breaking it or giving it points. These shapes are more natural and organic typically and usually communicate the same things as circles from a psychological perspective. But because you can loosely shape them into something that both represents a circle and a triangle or square, just without the finished points, you can simultaneously communicate visually the same core emotional hints of squares and triangles or other shapes while still maintaining the softness and joyfulness and whimsy that comes with the humble circle. This technique is often used in a lot of children's age programming, like Bluey for example. It's used in older technology designs like early Macintosh Apple products. It's commonly seen utilized in art styles like Frutiger Arrow or corporate Memphis, where the intended impact is to maintain a sense of peace, to help either set atmospheric tone, or to communicate something specific about the product, since it's used a lot in advertising, typically for technology or for software that's designed to assist and help people in some way. This isn't a hard rule, of course, like anything else, but it's a common enough design choice that you will see it more and more in your day-to-day life as you look for it out in the real world. Rectilinear shapes are often seen more in man-made structures. However, it does still appear in nature. Typically, you'll see these structures in crystalline forms like bismuth, cubic pyrite, zircon, which forms in a tetragonal shape. And even snowflakes under a microscope are not only symmetrical in form, but incredibly rectilinear upon closer inspection. The most basic and common forms of art involving these shapes have roots in ceramics and tiling, and the third dimension primarily in sculpting. However, visually, there's the classic art style of de stijl, which is a Dutch word. It is that art style of basic block shapes and colors. There's Cubism, which is another classic example, with derivative shapes constructing the full silhouette of a figure in a way that you can still tell what you're looking at with all of those shapes and all of those hard lines and edges. And Art Deco is a classic favorite of mine that often is utilized in both architecture and visual design. You can, of course, combine curvilinear and rectilinear shapes, and their harmonies, when put together, formulate a new space. Art styles like Futurism, Neoplasticism, Art Nouveau, and more experimental modern art forms in both installations, paintings, and sculpture alike often incorporate all of those shapes. Now that we have covered the categories of shapes and how they're utilized in different art styles, let's talk about the shape in silhouette. In character design and structural design, a silhouette should be distinct and easy to visually read from a distance. You don't want your silhouette to have too many intersecting shapes that will muddle the design, unless of course you're intentionally trying to bury the lead or create something that is meant to blend into the background as much as possible, but typically people who create don't want to do that. Typically, you want your work to stand out. So, understanding shapes, how they interact with the silhouette, imagine that what you've drawn in front of you has no color, no line. It is just the silhouette. Imagine it's standing against the sun and all you're seeing is the blackness. Do they look like anything? If they look too generic, if they don't look like anything, if you cannot tell what you are looking at, it is time to revisit the drawing board, and it is time to flesh out that silhouette. You can do this by not only thinking about the actual shapes in the character design or the positive space on your canvas, but the outside shapes or negative space in your canvas as well. Think about the shapes of your posing and what that tells people. For example, if you're having an action scene and you want the impact to feel more intense, I would avoid square, circle, or curvilinear shapes in the silhouette dressing. Personally, I would use sharp angles and harsh lines, not just in the pose, but in the exaggeration of motion, in the smear lines, and impact framing if applicable as well. All of that communicates the intensity of the moment. Meanwhile, if it was a sort of soft play, sort of fight, Softer shapes in the silhouette or grounded stances with less exaggeration or even curved lines of action might highlight a lack of intensity and force behind a punch. Shapes can help in big ways, but they can also help in little ways too. Accessories and details exhibiting certain shapes can communicate certain things about your character and what they embody. Now, it's also important to remember that these rules of art are also relatively Eurocentric. Other cultures have different visual interpretations of shapes and designs outside of the scholastic norm, so to speak. Culture and history can also be a big contributing factor in these conversations. For example, in Peruvian textile arts, a lot of patterns and designs utilize triangular shapes and trapezoids and other geometric patterns, and because they are inherently and literally woven into the fabric of their culture, I don't think you'd look at these patterns and think sharp, edgy, violent. If I had grown up with these patterns being woven into my clothes and my blankets, I'd probably associate them with softness and warmth, or comfort in the same way that we might associate those more square and diamond stitch patterns in knitted sweaters that you see Americans and Europeans wearing. That's one example of many, and the rules that I've taught you so far are, again, very Eurocentric and by proxy kind of North American. So if you are working on a project that is set in a different cultural background or a different time period, you might do some more research into their specific historical designs, take notes, read literature written by artists and craftsmen in their fields in those specific places. Take notes of line work as well, because line art is the bridge between the language of shape and the language of texture. Now, if you want to get good at utilizing shape language, a lot of the design practice drills that I have seen people do involve silhouette drawings, where you create a character design within the confines of a shape in a sort of UPA style. I've personally always been a fan of the additive and subtractive methods, using large shapes or globs of paint or the lasso tool, and slowly carving the design into it. This works great for not only character design, but also prop design and weapon design. If you have follow-up questions about this topic, please let me know in the comments. I will answer what I can, and if you need a visual answer, then I will make a follow-up to this video. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your project.